the things, however, in spite of all of the concerns today, in spite of the pandemic, in spite of the riots, what were some of the traditions that stood out to you as, okay, this is what a normal inauguration is like, this is what we are used to in this country?
They had the traditional hallmark of an inauguration. The Chief Justice, John Roberts, swore in Joe Biden to be the president. Most of the Supreme Court justices were there. The leaders of Congress were there. You saw Senate Majority Leader, who's going to be Majority Leader just for a few more minutes, sitting right up close. Yeah. You had Nancy Pelosi. You had Kevin McCarthy, even Kevin McCarthy, who voted to object to the Electoral College count on January 6th. He was still sitting up there as well. You had, a majority of members of Congress, and you had the feeling that this is just a really monumental and important part of American democracy. The fact that this happens every 4 years, this peaceful transition of power, even though this year it almost wasn't peaceful and it had a lot of problems and threats leading up to it, but it happened. They pulled it off. It took 25,000 National Guard troops to ensure that it did, but it did have all the hallmarks and all the trappings of a normal inauguration, except for the fact that it was much more intimate and it didn't have, as I said, hundreds of thousands of people watching in person.
Leanne, we are looking at images now of the White House, of course, where Joe Biden is, now the 46th president. We just watched Kamala Harris enter the Eisenhower Executive Office building just off to, I guess, the west, if you will, of the West Wing, where her offices are. And so this is a new day. This is a new president. We have our first female vice president. And as you mentioned, it's just a little bit after 4. The Senate will come into session at 4:30 this afternoon and swear in its newest members. This is a place that you know well. You spend so much time inside Capitol Hill. Would you just tell our viewers about the changes that are going to happen there today?
Absolutely. So there will be 3 new Democratic senators sworn in, the 2 Georgia senators, Ossoff and Warnock, and then, of course, the California senator who is replacing Kamala Harris. His name is Alex Padilla, the first Hispanic senator representing the state of California. There's also a lot of history in the Georgia senators as well. Warnock, the first African-American to represent Georgia in the Senate. But what that does as far as the numbers are concerned, that puts the Senate at an evenly divided Senate, 50 Republicans and 50 Democrats. With Kamala Harris as the vice president, of course, as vice president, she is president of the Senate. So while Vice President Harris is walking into the White House as we speak, she's going to be spending a lot of time in her old home in this Capitol right behind me, because she is likely going to have to be a tie-breaking vote on many policy, many issues that come before the Senate because of this closely divided Senate. But Joe Biden, he had a message today in his inauguration speech of unity. So the Senate has a choice to make. They are evenly divided. They can work together in a bipartisan way, take the leadership of Joe Biden in his words, and try to accomplish things for the American people. Or it could also be a lot of gridlock and something where things just do not get done because that lack of bipartisanship could very well devolve into fighting and just a complete stalemate. So these members of Congress behind me are going to have an elevated role moving forward.
I want to bring Mark Murray back in. Mark, a question for you about this, because it's not something that our viewers are necessarily used to. Over the last 4 years, Vice President Mike Pence was not called upon to be very involved in matters in the Senate because it was not an evenly divided Senate. How will this look different? Will we often see Kamala Harris, Vice President Kamala Harris, on the Senate floor in her new role? Or is that something still to be determined based on what type of a relationship the Democrats and Republicans choose to have with one another over the next couple of years?
Yeah, I mean, given the 50-50 composition of the United States Senate, it really is that Kamala Harris's top job over the next year or two, probably before we get to the 2022 midterm elections, is going to be casting that tie-breaking vote just on matters of organization, committee pieces of legislation. So I would expect her to be in the United States Senate quite a bit. And Allison, we haven't had something like this since 2001, and that's actually after George W. Bush ended up becoming president after that controversial election. And you ended up having a situation where the Senate was tied. Then there was actually a defection where the Democrats gained control of the United States Senate, and Republicans were able to take it back in the following midterm season. So we really haven't had this kind of Senate majority hanging by a thread since 2001. And that just really is going to keep Kamala Harris in Washington. She's probably not going to be the same type of vice president that Joe Biden was in 2009, while Barack Obama was trying to rescue the U.S. economy after the Great Recession. Joe Biden was going overseas, going to Iraq, going to Afghanistan, meeting with a lot of world leaders. And I'm not saying that Kamala Harris is not going to be doing that some of the time, but one of her chief roles is going to be casting that tie-breaking vote in the United States Senate.
Spending a little bit more time in the Senate, a place she knows, of course, very well. I'd like to bring in co-host of NBC's Today Show, Al Roker, who is along the parade route. And Al, I just have to say, one of the highlights for all of us today, your fist bump from now President Biden. We have a clip of that. I'd like to play it for our viewers who might have missed that earlier today. Let's show everyone what happened.
It's good to see you.
You got to keep doing this.
I know I did.
Good to see you.
It's been 3 hours. How does it feel, Mr. President?
It feels great.
It feels good?
Feels good.
All righty. Dr. Biden, thank you. Well, got a fist bump. There you go.
Al, you got a fist bump from the president. Tell us about it.
Well, you know, it's funny. We had started off. He was about there, and we started calling for him, and he got basically parallel to me, and I thought, you know what, it's not going to happen this time, but that's okay. It's good. He's president. He got some things on his mind, and then all of a sudden he ran over and got the fist bump. You know, very COVID friendly, safety, and then he's talked a little bit, and then he kept going, and that's more than you can ask for.
Oh, Al, I have to say, we were all watching it happen live on the edge of our seats. You were really using your lungs there, trying to call for him. And we thought, oh, he's going to pass, Al, he's going to pass. And you got him. What an exciting moment. Just your reflections, your thoughts on this day, this historic day in so many ways for our country.
Well, I think everybody's talking about unity. That we're looking to get back to a little more normalcy. The things that we have come to expect, I think people are looking forward to, and that's not a bad thing, And to see, the president talking about American goodness and our innate fairness to each other and wanting to bring people together. And seeing other people, from this morning, a bipartisan group going to church together. I mean, that's something we haven't seen in a long time. So, who knows how long it's going to last, but as long as it does, it's a wonderful feeling.
Al, one more question for you. I just have to ask about the lack of the crowds today. I look at you there and I think, my goodness, when you are out on the Today Show Plaza, there are typically more people when we're not in a pandemic and we don't have these kinds of security concerns. What was it like being at a parade today without the crowds?
Well, it was very quiet. That was the odd thing, Allison. This quiet. And visually, you would normally, right along this fence line for the White House, this would be lined with stands, and those stands would be filled with people. And I realized, and what you're watching right now, all the members of the military falling in line now that the president and the vice president have gone. They are all, I mean, there's hundreds of them lining Pennsylvania Avenue. But what's interesting, I've never, during covering, I now think 5 inaugurals, you never see the White House because the stands are there. And there's a reviewing stand. You never see it. You can't see the old executive office building. And there it is. It's been very quiet, but it has been a very different inaugural, which seems to fit what we have been going through. But no less joyous and no more, and it's certainly that representation of what we have had in this country, 59 inaugurals, 59 peaceful transfers of power. And that's what there's no other country on earth that has had this. And so at the end of the day, the norms may have been battered a bit, but they've held, and we've seen that they're elastic and they can snap back.
Al, there may not be crowds and it may be quiet, but you have a great view and you got one terrific fist bump there. Thanks for sharing it with us. We couldn't wish it upon a better person. Thanks so much, Al.
Thank you. Thanks, Al. Yeah, I missed. Kamala Harris kind of blew by, but I got 1 out of 2, and that 500 gets you into the Hall of Fame.
It sure does. She knew that Joe Biden took care of you, so she was saving it for someone else.
There you go.
Thanks, Al.
Bye-bye.
All right, NBC News correspondent Shaquille Brewster is joining us now from the Parade Across America route. We should let you know, too, this is a virtual and live event that replaced the traditional parade along Pennsylvania Avenue, though, as you've been seeing, there are some elements of that traditional parade, even without the crowds of hundreds of thousands of Americans. So, Shaq, let me ask you, what has it been like for you being there in person? We were just talking to Al Roker, who set the bar pretty high. He got a fist bump from the president. Have you seen the president or the vice president gotten a wave yet? You know, Al got all the attention.
Yeah. I know. It's funny because not only did Al get that moment with President Joe Biden, but you saw Mike Memley also got some time with the new president. Here, I'll tell you, we were at the beginning of the parade route, and Pennsylvania Avenue is behind me, and that's normally where you see the president and vice president march up as they make their way from the U.S. Capitol, but this time it was a little bit different. We know President Biden went to Arlington National Ceremony and had that very somber commemoration or that wreath laying at the cemetery before making his way here. He came along 15th Street and then made his way onto Pennsylvania Avenue. And I'll tell you, when the motorcade went through, when the presidential limousine passed us, it moved slowly. I can tell you I got a wave from First Lady Joe Biden, but that's the extent of it. I didn't have any moment that Al Roker had, but you saw the presidential limousines go up. You saw first it was the University of Delaware drum line that made its way up 15th Street.
Right.
Then it was President Biden. Then you heard Howard University Showtime drumline make their way up, and then it was Vice President Harris. But this was the beginning of it, and as you mentioned, it was a hybrid parade. So it started out, what you essentially saw on the ground and in person was essentially the start of a parade performance, and then now we'll see that virtual element take place where different groups from all 50 states and 6 territories will have their moment, similar to what we saw during the DNC during that official roll call. Allison?
Yeah, Shaq, very cool to see the president escorted by his alma mater, the University of Delaware, as you said, the vice president escorted by her alma mater, Howard University. You see Joe Biden there giving Al Roker that fist bump. I got to say, Shaq, if nothing else, I realize that this parade may have lacked the crowds and some of the noise, but wow, was I impressed watching Joe Biden run to say hello to people. He certainly got his work out today.
Oh, without a doubt. And that's something that you saw in past inaugurations with when he was vice president. It was something he would ping pong back and forth. He has a lot of energy. He likes parades. We know he's a retail politician, so he likes this atmosphere. And the thing about this parade that makes it a little bit different and a little bit easier for him to do that is that point you were making with Al, and that there were no spectators. There weren't the thousands of people, members of the public, here to see it. I'll tell you, right where I am right now, there was a line of police officers right here. The officers behind me, they were from Florida, and then you had the parade route. But the police officers were here not really protecting anything, because right behind us there's a 9-foot barricade there. So there wasn't that risk that you normally have with the parade. So it did allow him to go back and forth. But it was a little quieter. It wasn't that exciting and that energy that you normally feel from a parade. I'll tell you one thing about these parades. I mean, we have seen some sort of procession since George Washington, and usually they come along Pennsylvania Avenue. At one point, you know, you go back to President Eisenhower, his parade was over 4.5 hours long. You have parades that have floats. In one parade, they erected different arches to go up as the president was coming up. So these are usually highly produced events with thousands of people coming out to enjoy the moment. You don't have that sense here, but you do have the sense that the candidates, or now the president and the vice president, that they enjoyed the moment, even though it was scaled down amid the security concerns and amid this coronavirus pandemic.
Yeah, Shaq, we've been saying even with their masks on, you could still see both of their eyes smiling on this momentous day. And Shaq, I got to say, in spite of all this, it is the best view the press will probably ever get, because you don't have to be looking over so many people to see what's going on, to see the White House. So a couple of small perks if you're looking for the positives when we have an inauguration in a pandemic and with these security concerns. Shaq, thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you, Allison.
Joe Biden took the oath of office just before noon today on the West Lawn of the U.S. Capitol. And then he delivered one of, if not the most important speech of his political career, calling on America to unite. Take a listen.
Please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Joseph Robinette Biden, Jr., do solemnly swear.
I, Joseph Robinette Biden, Jr., do solemnly swear.
That I will faithfully execute.
That I will faithfully execute.
The office of President of the United States.
Office of President of the United States.
And will, to the best of my ability.
Will, to the best of my ability.
Preserve, protect, and defend.
Preserve, protect, and defend.
The Constitution of the United States.
The Constitution of the United States.
So help you God.
So help me God.
Congratulations, Mr. President.
Chief Justice Roberts, Vice President Harris, Speaker Pelosi, Leader Schumer, Leader McConnell, Vice President Pence, and my distinguished guests, my fellow Americans. This is America's day. This is democracy's day. The people, the will of the people has been heard, and the will of the people has been heeded. We've learned again that democracy is precious. Democracy is fragile. And at this hour, my friends, democracy has prevailed. Few people in our nation's history have been more challenged or found a time more challenging or difficult than the time we're in now. Once-in-a-century virus that silently stalks the country. It's taken as many lives in 1 year as America lost in all of World War II. Millions of jobs have been lost. Hundreds of thousands of businesses closed. A cry for racial justice, some 400 years in the making, moves us. The dream of justice for all will be deferred no longer. A cry for survival comes from the planet itself. A cry that can't be any more desperate or any more clear. And now, a rise of political extremism, white supremacy, domestic terrorism, that we must confront and we will defeat. Politics doesn't have to be a raging fire, destroying everything in its path. Every disagreement doesn't have to be a cause for total war. And we must reject the culture in which facts themselves are manipulated and even manufactured. The answer is not to turn inward, to retreat into competing factions, distrusting those who don't look like you, or worship the way you do, or don't get their news from the same sources you do. We must end this uncivil war that pits red against blue, rural versus urban, conservative versus liberal. We can do this. America has been tested, and we've come out stronger for it. We will repair our alliances and engage with the world once again, not to meet yesterday's challenges, but today's and tomorrow's challenges. And we'll lead not merely by the example of our power, but by the power of our example. Democracy and hope, truth and justice did not die on our watch, but thrived. That America secured liberty at home and stood once again as a beacon to the world. That is what we owe our forebears, one another, and generation to follow. So, with purpose and resolve, we turn to those tasks of our time, sustained by faith, driven by conviction, and devoted to one another and the country we love with all our hearts. May God bless America, and may God protect our troops. Thank you, America.
All right, let's get to NBC News correspondent Mike Memley, who is in Lafayette Square. Mike, if Al Roker got a fist bump, you got a question. Tell us about your, I know it was brief, but your conversation with the now president, whom you have covered for more than a decade.
Allison, let's not sell this short. This was the first exclusive interview with the President of the United States, all right? It was more than a question, even if it was only a few seconds. But, you know, I can't help, given what you just said, I have been covering him a long time. The first time I interviewed him, actually, he was a senator running for president. It was northern New Hampshire. We had a longer interview because he was a candidate who needed the press coverage. So I feel very privileged to have even gotten a quick question today, of course. But I asked him, you know, you have been aspiring to this office for your whole career. And I pointed at the White House. I said, what does this moment feel like as you're ready to walk in there for the first time as the President of the United States? And he said, I feel like I'm going home. Short answer, but I think it says a lot about this moment for him, because there is so much going through his mind. Think of all the challenges that the country faces that he has now inherited. He's been president for just a few hours, and he's going to get to work. We know he has a busy agenda in terms of all the executive orders he has to sign. But you know, this is clearly the capstone of his career. There was a moment that really struck me during the inauguration, in fact, right after he took the oath and turned to his family, and then his wife and his two living children, his daughter Ashley and his son Hunter, sort of just embraced collectively. I don't even think words were spoken, but there was so much emotion conveyed there. And so that was really, I was trying to hopefully draw a little bit out of him about what must be going through his mind today. But it was obviously quite a moment to have. I think it also speaks to the challenges that are ahead now. He can enjoy this moment. He feels this is a day of celebration as much as it's a solemn day for the country. But there really has been a sense of urgency conveyed all across the Biden team. They are going to issue as many executive orders as we've seen a first-day president issue in a long time. And so when Vice President Kamala Harris walked just a short time after, I asked her about what the priority was, and she said, getting to work. So just to throw in, I know our friend Al Roker wasn't able to get some attention from her, but I also managed to snag a question with her as well, Allison.
All right, now you're just showing off a little bit, but I'm going to help you with that, Mike, because you not only got an answer from her, but you got a laugh too, which was something else. Listen, you said it. Let's not sell short your quick question to Joe Biden. His answer may have just been a few words, but it really seems like it does capture just the essence of today, as did Vice President Harris's. That right, this is a celebration, but they are getting down to some very serious work today. Let's talk about this inauguration. I mean, I can't help but see the White House so clearly behind you, see some people milling about, but they're probably all working. They're not Americans who are there to enjoy this day. What has it been like today, being part of such a unique parade, such a unique inauguration, perhaps something we may never see like this again?
Yeah, you know, I've had this thought actually as far back as this summer about when we were focused, of course, on the pandemic and the way it was affecting all our lives. And during the lockdown, I would often just take a long walk from my apartment. I lived near Capitol Hill, and there was a moment when I said, as I walked past the Capitol, I said, wow, if Joe Biden wins this election and is inaugurated president, he's not going to have a typical inauguration. As we now know, especially given the security concerns, there wasn't even a guarantee that he would have an outdoor inauguration at all. Think about the pictures when you look back at this moment in decades. People are going to be wondering, wearing masks, what was that about? It's such a unique moment, of course. And there have been a lot of folks I've talked to who sort of, you know, feel for the president. I was almost going to call him the president-elect after I kept calling him the former vice president, but the president, about the fact that he doesn't get the typical celebration. He doesn't get the crowds of hundreds of thousands on the mall, that he doesn't get a much more elaborate parade than the brief one we just saw here. And I couldn't help but think back to history again. And when he was elected to the Senate as a 29-year-old, a moment of real celebration for his young family. And then, of course, it very quickly, within weeks, turned to tragedy. He wasn't sworn into the Senate, in the well of the Senate. He didn't get to have the traditional inauguration, as it were, for a senator. He was sworn in at the bedside of his two boys in a hospital room in Delaware. So that's why, as I've talked to a number of current, former Biden staffers, people who've been friends of his for a long time, and I just sort of asked them generally, what do you think about this moment? What's going through your mind? And I keep hearing back the same thing, which is if there was ever a moment in history that called for Joe Biden, it is this moment. He is coming into office with all the experience behind him, all that has been tested. Empathy, they always say, is his superpower. And think about the emotion we saw yesterday when he was in Delaware, as he would think he was bidding goodbye to the state, but also getting sentimental about his son, Beau, who passed away, who he said we should be introducing him as the president. That, I think, is what Biden folks say, is this is really the moment that captures all of those qualities, and it's the right one for him.
Yeah, I mean, Mike, you know this president, and I have to say, I think we're all going to go through this for a day or two, right? Adjusting to his new title.
Yeah.
Joe Biden is certainly someone who has had so many, even in just the last year. But you know now President Joe Biden far, far better than I do. I'm simply a viewer here. But you have to think that just the sense that we've gotten from watching him over the years, that if you were to ask him about what was missing today, it wouldn't be, I think, about what was missing for him. He strikes me as someone who would say, as you mentioned, he's so sorry that his son wasn't part of this moment, so sorry for the Americans who could not be part of this moment, because he seems so often someone who thinks about those around him, who cares about those around him, and who has lived such an untraditional path. You've described so many of the moments in his life that were not as one might expect them to be. Yet he keeps putting one foot in front of the other, keeps at the task at hand. In some ways, perhaps this unusual inauguration, as you've said, he was perhaps the best person suited for this moment, and maybe it wasn't all that unusual to him. To that end, I have to ask, when you watched today, and I asked Mark Murray this same question, were there any points where you felt like, okay, this really has some of the pomp and the circumstance of a typical inauguration? I think for me, when I saw Lady Gaga and J-Lo, and I said, all right, there's a little bit of the celebrity. When you look at it from a tight shot, maybe not the bird's eye view with all the people missing, but there were a few moments where I felt like, okay, this feels, for a moment, a little bit normal.
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, I can't tell you how often, especially over the last 2 weeks since the rioting and the unbelievable scenes at the Capitol, when I've asked the Biden team, you know, how can you not move this inside? How can how can you believe that you're going to be able to safely have that kind of gathering? They were so insistent on us having that visual. Yes, it was different. There weren't as many people. The crowd was a bit spread out. But they really wanted that moment on the west front of the Capitol because of the times we're in, because of what you heard him speak to very squarely, the era of disinformation, unfortunately, that we live in, that he have the same kind of inauguration that past presidents have had. They wanted it to look the same. And another part of this, Allison, as well, is, think about what now former President Trump would often mock in terms of how easy it was to be presidential. He could be presidential. Well, Biden wants to make the presidency presidential again, and that's why some of these rituals, they are taking very great care to return.
Making presidency presidential again. Mike Memoli, thanks so much for being with us on this special day. And nice work getting to talk to both the president and the vice president. You did us proud.
Thank you, Allison. Appreciate it.
NBC News correspondent Morgan Radford is on the parade route near Lafayette Square. Morgan, looking at you there with a quiet road behind you, I'm just struck by some of the differences today, the absence of the crowds. Tell us what it was like there as the parade kicked off.
Yeah, we're just steps away from the White House, Allison, and I think Mike put it best when he said this is an inauguration unlike any other. So typically behind me here, you would see the streets lined with well-wishers, people from the public who are coming to send their congratulations to the incoming administration. But instead today, lining these streets were just all servicemen and women. Members, for example, of the Marines were outside, policemen and women. But the reality of it is, Allison, this was different. It was almost more sterile, so to speak, the typical celebratory tone that you would see at inauguration. You can see behind me now, the roads are mostly cleared out from that in-person parade that was very short, leading into the virtual parade. But what struck me about everything, Allison, was this notion of accessibility. You saw both President Biden and Madam Vice President Kamala Harris really putting on display elements of their past. You saw the drum line from the University of Delaware, a state school that Joe Biden is proud to come from, when only about 50% of U.S. presidents have come from non-Ivy League universities. And then just behind him, leading in the procession for Madam Vice President Harris, was the Howard University drum line. You had the Bisons on full display, really showing the culture of HBCUs that have historically been struggling for funding in the United States. But here you had proud African-American students who were able to see exactly what the world could be, and they too could achieve the highest office in the land. So this was really about accessibility, but putting a bit of a stain on some of the celebration, of course, was the intense security, because we're inside a secure zone right now. Take a listen to what lawmaker said that she told us. This is Representative Adams from North Carolina. We caught up with her yesterday. She decided that she was going to be here in person, unlike some of her colleagues. And take a listen to why she said it was so important to be here.
But then to have the military reinforcements come in, I think has startled some, but we are still not going to let this dampen the celebratory moment that it is. Well, I think the fact that we have the first woman, the first woman of color, the first African-American woman, Asian-American woman being sworn in as to the second highest office in the land, I don't think that we can backpedal that. I think that that's great in and of itself, and that shows that we have made tremendous progress.
And that's what this is about at the end of the day, Allison. It's about progress and it's about inclusion. This is an administration that has promised to have in its cabinets and through its appointees an administration that reflects back to us the America that we know, the America that we love, and the America that we're a part of. Allison.
And an administration that is getting to work on that already, wasting no time. Morgan Radford, thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Are you ready?
Monday boost?
Are you ready for a boost?
How do you feel about that book?
We love those nurses. That was beautiful.
All month long, let's start today.
Let's go 2021.
Kicking off the new year strong. It's time to take care of you with healthy foods, fitness.
You're incredible.
And how to jumpstart your love life.
Cupid is winning.
So join us and start today.
Make no mistake, what happened that day was an insurrection against the United States government. Is this the beginning of something or the end of something? Should Donald Trump be ostracized from the Republican Party as you know it?
If it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press.
Breaking news, the deadly siege on Congress. Lawmakers move to safe locations. There's 2 more weeks left in this presidency. Where is this going? Despite what we've been through, there will be a transfer of power at the U.S. Capitol.
NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt.
You're watching NBC News Now. We've got some breaking news.
We actually saw a large convoy of the National Guard come through here.
It's news made for your streaming world. Live weekdays starting at 6 a.m. Eastern.
For breaking news in our changing world, download the NBC News app.
We are a country of laws, a democracy built on free and fair elections, where the majority, not the mob, rules, and no rioter, no act of insurrection or domestic terror, no desperate despot can take away all we have built, all that we stand for, and all we hold dear.
President Joe Biden wasting no time getting to work on day one. In his first hours as president, Joe Biden will be signing more than a dozen executive actions and doing many of President Trump's controversial policies. NBC News correspondent Carol Lee is joining me now from Washington, D.C., with a great view of the White House, as always. Carol, I'd like to talk about the executive orders in a minute. But first, I want to ask you about a moment in President Biden's speech where he talked about the Capitol riots from just 2 weeks ago. Let's play that.
To all those who did not support us, let me say this. Hear me out as we move forward. Take a measure of me and my heart. And if you still disagree, so be it. That's democracy. That's America. The right to dissent peaceably within the guardrails of our republic is perhaps this nation's greatest strength. Yet hear me clearly. Disagreement must not lead to disunion. And I pledge this to you. I will be a president for all Americans.
Carol, we have had an insurrection, a second impeachment, and today an inauguration, all in just 2 weeks. Let's talk a little bit about all that President Biden is walking into and how he plans to heal and try to unite this country.
Allison, you make a great point. You know, it's 2021. We're three Wednesdays in, and each Wednesday we had January 6th, the storming of the Capitol. We had January 13th, President Trump being impeached for a second time, and then today, January 20th, Joe Biden getting sworn in as the 46th president of the United States and delivering that speech. And I think when you talk to people around the now president, and you hear what he said really throughout the campaign and through the transition, and then again today. Unity is his overarching message about everything, and what he's tried to do and his team has tried to do in the past 24 hours is really demonstrate that. So you saw last night where they did this memorial at the mall for victims of coronavirus, and that's not something that we've seen, and this is a country that's been hurting from this pandemic for many months now. You saw him go to church this morning with bipartisan senators and congressmen from the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. That's something he wanted to do. Then you heard him in that speech where he's saying, you know, just listen to me. And what I think the other half of that message that he's saying is, I hear you. And that's how he's trying to sort of begin to bridge this divide that we've seen in the country over the last 4 years that really came to a head, as you noted, 2 weeks ago. So today, that's the message that you're hearing. And you've seen a lot of actions and ceremonial steps that seem accepting to that message here in Washington. And there's a lot of talk of a new day. But this is probably the easiest day of Joe Biden's presidency because it doesn't get any easier from here. He has a number of policies that he wants to put forward. All you need to do is look at the fact that he doesn't have any members of his cabinet yet. So that's something that is running into some headwinds, although he'll eventually probably get there sooner rather than later. But still, this is a country that's still divided despite this day. So while he's having this moment and that's his message, the hard part really begins now.
Yeah, for sure. And Carol, you said it. If 2021 has taught us anything, it is definitely have your coffee on Wednesdays because that seems to be the day when all things happen, at least so far. Carol, our colleague over at the White House, Jeff Bennett, offering some great color today, describing what the Biden White House is looking like already. Could you share some of that, what it's like there today, what's been happening so far? And to our viewers, please forgive us, because we're going to ask you to use your mind's eye as Carol describes this new Biden White House, because Secret Service does not allow press to take those kinds of pictures for security reasons.
That's right. And just to set the scene, there's a very small space inside the White House that the press is actually allowed to roam freely with as long as you have a pass that allows you there. There's a lower press area, which is right outside of the briefing room area, which is familiar to any viewers who's watched a White House press briefing. And then there's, if you go, it's called upper press. You go past the colonnade, the doors to the colonnade that go out to the Rose Garden, and you go up to where the press secretary's offices are. And it's just been empty. And it was being cleaned out over the course of this morning, and then they put up plexiglass, which is a shift from President Trump's staff, who were maskless and sat in cramped quarters just right up next to each other without any real coronavirus protections in place. And this is a different team. And so there's plexiglass that's been put in. They've already hung photos of last night, now President Biden's event at the mall with that coronavirus memorial, his speech in Delaware before he arrived here in Washington, D.C. So all of this happens really, really quickly. And that's just what we can see. There's a whole other bunch of stuff that's happening inside the White House residence where they've moved in the now first family.
Yeah, we're all excited to see those first images of the dogs in the White House, Carol. We're a dog house here, and we can't wait to check that out for sure.
Me too.
Carol Lee, thank you so much.
Thanks, Allison.
All right, we're going to bring in our panel now. Let me introduce you to Jonathan Alter, NBC News political contributor and presidential historian. Joining him, Kimberly Atkins, NBC News contributor and senior opinion writer for the Boston Globe. Jonathan, Kimberly, thrilled to have both of you with us today. Kimberly, let's start with you. Inaugurations are often historic, but not always like this one. America, no longer a country that has never had a female vice president, that has never had a black vice president, that has never had a South Asian vice president. Kamala Harris changing all of that today. Let's talk about what this means for America right now and for years to come.
I mean, coming at any time, it would be a monumentous moment, but certainly coming after a year where the nation was defined in part by protests for racial justice, seeing someone who checks all of those first boxes being sworn in as vice president, sworn in, by the way, by the first Latina Supreme Court justice. It was just, it felt to me like a celebration of Black and brown excellence, as I tweeted. And that representation is so important. I can speak as an American who didn't have those types of figures to look up to when I was a child. And I think about all the children, including Vice President Harris's nieces and grandnieces who were there watching her, and all the other girls who are watching that happen. It's a really important moment, and it's an important moment for our nation to see that representation, to see a Black woman, an Indian American woman in power in that space. It's hugely important.
I love that image we just showed of now Vice President Kamala Harris taking a deep breath as she stood up and put her hand up, about to take that oath. You really just get the sense that she was taking in what a moment this was, what she was doing there, making history. Jonathan, I'd like to talk to you about the visual of all the former presidents we saw together today, except for, of course, Donald Trump and Jimmy Carter, who could not travel. President Joe Biden acknowledging Carter, though, in his inaugural address. Could you talk about some of the traditions like that did carry on today, and perhaps some of those that were different because the outgoing president wasn't there?
Well, I think the first thing to note is that this is the first time since 1869 when Andrew Johnson, who had just been impeached, did not show up at the inauguration of Ulysses S. Grant, that the outgoing president has stiffed the incoming president. It's normally part of our tradition and the peaceful transfer of power, which was so abused and insulted by what happened at the Capitol a couple of weeks ago. But having said that, there were some of these traditions that continued, and it was very important that Vice President Pence was there. He went to the inauguration instead of going to Trump's farewell. Of course, former President George W. Bush and Laura Bush were there. So these are or should be bipartisan moments. And just to give you some indication of how that worked in the past, the first words of Jimmy Carter's inaugural address in 1977 were, "I want to thank President Ford for all he did to heal our land." Ford became president after Nixon resigned. And then when Reagan became president 4 years later, one of the very first things he did in his speech was to thank Jimmy Carter for a smooth transition and for his work on getting the hostages home. So, you know, we do have these traditions. And the good news is, even though they've been terribly breached, we can recover them. And this day was a beginning toward doing that. And the normality of a lot of what happened, not just taking the oath on the west side of the Capitol per tradition, but even walking the last, several yards to the White House. These are things that give us a little sense of comfort that these small d democratic traditions will continue, and that, as President Biden said, democracy has prevailed.
Jonathan, as you put it, recovering some of our American traditions today. Jonathan Alter, Kimberly Atkins, thank you both so very much.
Thanks, Allison.
Before he left office, Donald Trump pardoned 74 people and commuted the sentences of 70 others. Former federal prosecutor and NBC News legal analyst Glenn Kirshner is here. Glenn, thank you so much for being with us. So let's talk about some of the notables on that list of pardons. Trump's former chief strategist, longtime ally Steve Bannon. We know their relationship had fallen into some stress, but let's talk about what Bannon was dealing with. Prosecutors alleged that his crowdfunding We Build the Wall campaign raised more than $25 million from Trump supporters, and he used hundreds of thousands of it for personal expenses. He hasn't yet gone to trial, but President Trump choosing to pardon him. Is it unusual to pre-pardon like this? What do you make of this situation?
You know, Allison, it's unusual but not unprecedented. Of course, the most famous example is when Gerald Ford pardoned Richard Nixon before Richard Nixon had ever been charged with a crime. But, you know, Steve Bannon is going to find himself in a really tricky position. And here's why. The Supreme Court has said in the case of George Burdick versus the United States back in 1915, they said the following. I've got the case in front of me, that a pardon carries with it an imputation of guilt, and acceptance of a pardon is a confession of guilt. What does that do with respect to Steve Bannon, who has not yet gone to trial? Well, he can't go to trial now in the federal case that was pending against him because the federal pardon prevents it. But the federal pardon does not now prevent New York State from charging him with financial crimes. And can I tell you something, Allison? When a guy like Steve Bannon engages in financial crimes, he steals from a nonprofit, I am quite certain he didn't take that money and report it as income on his federal or state income taxes. So he may have gotten away with his crimes in the federal system, but now this is like a law exam question. The state prosecutors can charge him with violating state financial crimes, including state tax fraud, and they can argue we get to use his acceptance of a pardon against him as a confession that he committed that crime by application of this 1915 Supreme Court case. So you know what? He may have gotten away with it in one system, but he may have harmed himself in another, the state system.
Glenn, as a daughter of a CPA and a person with an unusual interest in all things related to taxes, I love that you bring that point up. Another question for you. Let's talk about who wasn't on the pardon list. President Trump himself, his family, his personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani. A lot of speculation that might have happened. Could you talk about what would have been the danger of those pardons and why you think he ultimately decided against them?
Well, you know, some people don't want to be pardoned because, as we just discussed, accepting a pardon is essentially a confession of guilt, and they don't want to confess their guilt. I think we're all surprised he didn't pardon his children. He didn't pardon Rudy Giuliani, who we know was being investigated by the Southern District of New York, in part for the corrupt business that he was in with Lev Parnas and Igor Fruman, both of whom are being prosecuted by the Southern District of New York. But, you know, one thing I want everybody to keep in the back of their mind, Allison, is that you do not have to announce a pardon publicly for it to be valid. There is absolutely no Supreme Court case or law, a statute that says in order for a presidential pardon to be valid, it must be publicly announced. So in the event Donald Trump pardoned some people, given them pocket pardons, so to speak, and didn't announce them, that doesn't mean they're not valid. It just means we don't know about them yet. So I would recommend we all stay tuned.
Watch out for the pocket pardons. Glenn, you always think of something that we have not. Thank you so much. We really appreciate your expertise.
Thanks, Allison.
Hi, everyone. I'm Allison Morris. You're watching continuing special coverage on NBC News Now as Inauguration Day becomes a work day for now President Joe Biden. It was a day of ceremony and a day of action. The president taking the oath of office around noon today. Here's what he had to say in his inaugural address.
I know speaking of unity can sound to some like a foolish fantasy these days. I know the forces that divide us are deep and they are real. But I also know they are not new. Our history has been a constant struggle between the American ideal that we're all are created equal and the harsh, ugly reality that racism, nativism, fear, demonization have long torn us apart. The battle is perennial, and victory is never assured. Through Civil War, the Great Depression, World War, 9/11, through struggle, sacrifice, and setbacks, our better angels have always prevailed. In each of these moments, enough of us